Interesting.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Cheers.
Nice to meet you.
Yes, nice to meet you as well. I was.
Yeah, so we. So we might. Discussion. Yes, please. Thank you. Oh, it's time. It is time. All right. Audio check. Do it. Are they going to? There. Yeah. Well, yeah, there's front chair. Hello, everybody. Could you give me a thumbs up if you could hear me? If you can hear me, thumbs up. All right, audio check. Then calling the meeting to the December 20th, 2021 Design Review Committee meeting to order at 3:01 p.m. And for the record, all members are present, as are City Attorney Wadhams, staff Veal, staff Gum, and Thornborrow as the next officio member. First item on the agenda is changes to the agenda. We do have a request to relocate item X, or excuse me, 9A to be after 6A. And unless I hear anybody that does not wish to do that, we'll go ahead and make that change to the agenda. I'm not seeing anybody shaking their head no. And then the next item on the agenda will be the consent agenda, consisting of the December 6th, 2021 minutes, as well as moving the discussion for tiny homes, file number CPA fiscal year 2022 #1 to a date certain of February 22nd or 22nd of 22. And again, I said that was a discussion, but I believe that's the hearing. So moving that hearing date to a date certain. Can you confirm that we can hear that?
I move to approve the consent agenda as written.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you. And for the next item, old business action item A, design review fiscal year 2020 #21. As I was not present at the last meeting, City Attorney Charles Wadhams will be presiding over this issue, but I will still be acting as the ex officio planning official for this matter. Do you want to change seats?
No.
Okay. All right, I'll turn it over to Mr. Wadhams.
Thank you, Ms. Thornborrow. My name is Charles Wadhams. I'm the city attorney for Garden City. I want to put a couple things on the record before I turn it over to the parties and open it up for any public comment. First of all, this is a remanded proceeding on September 13th, 2021. City Council remanded this down to the Design Review Committee. And just for the record, Ms. Veal, it looks like we are recording. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we're recording a couple different ways.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Veal. Thank you, Ms. Veal. So, so this was a remand from September 13th. It was initially in front of design review on November 1st. At the time on November 1st, the committee continued it to 12/6 for more information on stacking. So we're here to talk about stacking primarily today. We came back on December 6th and it was continued to a date certain of today's date because both sides were presenting new information and the committee just wanted some time to digest that information and give the other side also a chance to digest and review that information. So we're here on the new information that was presented on December 6th. And so that's why we're here. The scope of this hearing is going to be focusing on stacking. The first thing I should go talk about briefly, can I just ask the committee members, is it true that the committee still has no conflicts of interest in this matter? Can I get a audio or a verbal on that, please?
I do not.
I do not.
Conflicts.
Thank you. And so what this is regarding the Dutch Bros coffee shop that's proposed on Chinden. We're here to talk about stacking. Let's talk about the record. Hopefully everybody has had a chance to look at the full record. If you go to our website, there were some submittals back on December 6th, and those are in the packet. And also there were some submittals from the attorneys, Samuel Perry and Ann Kunkel, shortly after that. The city gave both sides a deadline. Both cities complied with that deadline. So at this point in time, I'd like to ask either party or both parties, if you have any problem with the record. Is there anything we need to talk about? I'm going to talk about Mr. Wood's letter here in a minute, but other than Mr. Wood's letter, would either party like to put anything on the record regarding the record? Okay, thank you. So committee members, I know you've looked at that new information. One issue that I think the committee should maybe decide is what to do about John Wood's letter. John Wood did submit a letter. He's a property owner, Mr. Wood. And so would either party like to be heard regarding Mr. Wood's letter? Okay, committee members, could I turn it over to Ann Kunkel? She represents the Dutch Bros team and she would like to be heard on the John Wood letter. Would that be okay with the committee?
Yes.
Okay, because I think that it's an issue that I think the committee is going to have to decide regarding that letter. And I'll turn it over to Ms. Kunkel. Ms. Kunkel, can you say your name and address for the record, please?
Yes, Ann Kunkel, Varon Wardwell, 242 North H Street, Suite 200, Boise, Idaho, 83702. We object to the inclusion of Mr. Wood's letter for a couple of reasons. One, that the matter of the letter has previously been raised with the committee and has been responded to by applicant. Further, we believe that anything set forth in that letter is between two private parties as part of negotiating a private agreement, the easement agreement, and is the agreement at subject. We do not believe that this is the appropriate venue for Mr. Wood to raise this letter or to ask the design review committee to impose conditions onto the applicant as part of the design review. If Mr. Wood has complaints with either me or my clients, there's a venue to review that document, and that's through the judicial remedies, not through design review and asking them to pencil the agreement to put in a condition to effectuate the agreement he so desired.
Thank you, Ms. Kunkel. Mr. Perry, do you want to go on record? Do you want to go on record on that issue?
Yes, please.
Okay, please. Mr. Perry, start with your name and address for the record.
Sure, yeah. Samuel Perry. My address is 601 West Bannock Street in Boise. I represent Tom and Tyler Nelson. I don't represent John Wood, but my client did ask me to weigh in and just point out a few things. When this matter was remanded from the city council, there were no instructions to limit the number of parties or to those who participated in the appeal. We also understand that the neighborhood or the public notice that went out for the November 1st meeting identified the November 1st meeting as an open public hearing in which anyone would be able to come and testify. The party stipulated to an open record. And so I'm not going to comment on the substance of John Wood's letter other than to say it appears to relate directly to stacking. And this meeting is a continuation, several continuations from the November 1st meeting. So I think what my clients would recommend anyway for the course of action is for the design review to at least consider John Wood's written testimony and any public testimony that he gives today, any oral testimony. And then the design review can consider how much weight to give that evidence.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. And committee members, I have a memo in your packet. I can't remember exactly when I authored it, but it is true. This is an open record. This is going to be opened up for a public meeting after the presentations before deliberation. And so the parties did agree that this be an open record. The issue is whether that letter is beyond the scope of this review or not. I think it was basically timely submitted. It was a few days after the other submissions, but it was timely submitted. Essentially, this is a public hearing. He is a member of the public. I think he probably has standing. And so the issue is whether or not you should consider it based on the scope or the content of the letter. So with that, committee members, sorry to spring this on you, but I think it is a committee decision, not a staff decision on what you should do with the John Wood letter. So I'll turn it over to the committee on that issue. Thank you.
Well, I feel that the letter appears to be specifically addressing stacking issues. And that's what we're here to consider, is stacking. So
Yeah, and it's an open record, and there's still opportunity for any amount of new public testimony. So I would just consider this new public testimony that we can read and consider whether it's relevant or not. I mean, someone could get up and present us a letter that talked about how deep the snow on Bogus is, and we can consider it part of this or not, or applicable or not.
I agree.
Okay, all in favor of including the John Wood letter in the record, say aye.
Aye.
None opposed. Okay, motion carries. John Wood's letter will be in the record, and I would consider the record settled at this point in time. So with that being said, just to remind everybody, when we were here on December 6th, Mr. Perry started with his presentation. I'm sorry, Ms. Kunkel on behalf of Dutch Bros and that team, she gave her argument. Mr. Perry started his argument on behalf of Tom Nelson. Then we took a recess because it became apparent that we had some issues regarding some new information. So we took a recess. Then we came back and Mr. Perry asked for continuance and Ms. Kunkel agreed. So it was continued pursuant to a stipulation of the parties. Now we're here. So procedurally, Ms. Kunkel is going to have another 15 minutes to present. Mr. Perry will have 15 minutes to present, and then Ms. Kunkel can have 3 minutes for rebuttal. Then we'll open it up to the public, and then we'll close the public hearing and have deliberations for the committee. So that being said, I think I took care of all the preliminary matters. Ms. Kunkel, the floor is yours. For the record, you're still Ann Kunkel?
I still am.
Okay, thank you.
Hannah, do you have the PowerPoint? Yeah. Share the screen first. Can I get some technical assistance? Thank you. There we go. Okay. These slides are still in, or do I need to restate my name for you guys again?
We still have you on record.
Okay, thank you. So the slides that we have up here are all slides that are, I'm not sure what that's on there. As you can see, my PowerPoint prowess is not to Mr. Perry's. These are just slides of information that is in your packets already. We decided for ease of reference, we would pull them up here. As everyone knows, we're appearing before the committee again today to deal with application DSR FY 2020-21 for the limited purposes of determining if the design as it stands with respect to just, sorry, to determine for the limited purposes of if the stacking in the design is sufficient to satisfy Garden City Code 86B 3D2 as it relates to the standards of health, safety, and general welfare. We have proposed a design that allows for 11 cars to stack on site. Those are the separate the separate stacking lanes that are on site. We believe that based on the data that will be presented today by Mr. White, that we will prove that this design is sufficient, that there will be no impacts to 53rd Street or off-site or on-site impacts. This also will be shown in addition to the design by also operational efficiencies that have been implemented into this location that we don't see in the other locations of Chinden and Vista. I would like to make one clarification regarding the December 6th drawing that was submitted. That was submitted in response to a request to see exactly how many cars could be in the access lanes and the stacking lanes. That was not intended to reflect what we think the usage of the access lanes or the stacking lanes will be. That was to simply show a worst case scenario if 26 cars happen to be on site, not all of which would perhaps be Dutch Bros, but that was done at a request and not as us showing how many cars we think could be on there or the assumption that those would be all of our cars. I'm sure that Mr. White would be quite happy if he had 27 cars stacked up to go into his business, but the operational data will show that that is just not reflective of our design and how the business is operated. And while I know everybody wants to see the data as soon as possible, and Brian will explain it to us, I do have a few non-data related points as well as some lead up to the data. With respect to 53rd Street, we believe based on the design and the data that you will see that there will be no impacts to 53rd Street. As you can see, let's get to my next slide. Not the best, but as you can see on this slide, setting aside the right to use, what the scope of the right to use of the access area is for the moment. On this slide itself, it would take a full stacked lane of 11 cars and an additional 4 cars before there would be any impact to 53rd Street from the users of the access easement and our project. Again, I think it's important to clarify that not all of these cars may be Dutch Bros users. But as you will see with the operational data, this is just almost impossible. I would say impossible, but nothing's impossible. But the likelihood of having 11 cars fully stacked and 4 more backed up in the access lane to get into the stacking lanes is just not supported by our data. So with this, there are simply no impacts to 53rd Street. But assuming that the 16 cars were on here, there's been raised concerns that what would a car do if it went down 53rd Street, saw a slow progression in the access lanes and in the stacking lanes. As currently constructed, they could simply go to the end of 53rd Street, turn around in the cul-de-sac and leave 53rd Street. Again, we don't think that that's going to be a problem, but that requirement to go to the end of the street, turn around and leave and exit back to Chinden certainly does not seem like an undue burden on health, safety, or welfare. So not a lot to say on 53rd because we truly don't believe that there will be any offsite impacts as to 53rd. With respect to the use of the access lanes in the easement area and the stacking lanes, I think it's one thing that we should be clear that it was never our intent, and I think that we've all used the word a little loosely, of stacking versus access in these 2 lanes. We were asked how many cars would be required to stack before it impacted 53rd, gosh, maybe a year ago at this point. And so everyone has continued to use those terms. I would point out that this is an access easement. I will concede that the wood easement has the parking language, whereas the white easement has the access. But this is still an access easement, which allows cars to be in it to access the stacking lane. The stacking lane is distinctly separate from the circulation in the drive aisles, satisfying the code as it relates to drive-throughs and stacking lanes. Everybody who is a benefited party of the easement gets to use this. Again, we've kind of approached this easement and the access rights there to just be Dutch Bros, but there are other parties who will be using the access easement to access their properties as well. With respect to concerns that, again, if these full 27 cars were on there, which the data will again not support those numbers. There are 2 access points into the access lanes, allowing multiple ways for people to get to both our project and the other properties that are benefited by the access easement itself. Further, these are big enough for emergency access. So if there was an emergency on one of these locations, we have 2 accesses, both which are sufficient for safety and emergency vehicles. And we'd like to point out that, again, this is access, but having a car either be slowly progressing through the access lane or having to stop for any amount of time, a slight amount of time to access any of these parcels does not convert that access lane into a stacking lane. It is still an access lane. The stacking lanes are located on the project site. So we believe, based on that, again, the design as proposed does not have negative impacts on the public health, welfare, safety. This was just kind of a precursor. So I will now invite Mr. White to step up and go through the data that was provided and stand for any questions, unless the committee has any questions of me at this time.
Committee members, do you have any questions for Ms. Kunkel?
Mr. Wadums.
Yes, Ms. Thornborrow.
I do have a question for Ms. Kunkel. Would your client be opposed to some sort of condition of approval related to signage that stacking would not be allowed off-site? And should there be stacking occurring, that they're encouraged to park and go make an order?
We have no problem with that condition.
Thank you.
Sir, please say your name, say your name and give us your address for the record.
Brian White, 5177 West Chinden, Garden City 83714.
Thank you. Floor is yours.
Okay, so we were asked at previous meetings to come up with some type of standard for stacking and how our other shops operate. I own 14 locations throughout Boise, East Meridian, and Mountain Home. So we have quite a bit of data. And I know we supplied all of it to you guys. Do I just click to move this? Oh, there we go. And in your packets, you have all this data, but I wanted to take just a few minutes and walk you through what you're looking at so you can understand and kind of paint a little more of a picture of operationally how we go about things at Dutch Bros, because it's a blessing and a curse. We are busy and we acknowledge that, and the company as a whole is constantly trying to improve our operations to accommodate the cars we have. So, and what you're looking at on this first slide, it's we took a sample size of 3 stores. That was on purpose. The first line there you see is our current Chinden location, November 28th through December 4th. And then the second one is Mountain Home, and the third one is Vista. The reason these stores were chosen was for a couple of reasons. One, they're all very similar in volume on a monthly sales basis. And the Mountain Home, although it is a little higher than the other 2 volume-wise, it is what our proposed new Chinden location will be, exact to floor plan. Site plan is really similar as far as stacking as well. And so what we did was, I know we turned in data at the last meeting and it was somewhat cumbersome and it was long and car by car. And what I did was I took that same data, but I condensed it into this so you can kind of get an idea of our AM, noon, and PM times of cars. And so we have a system we use from HME. That's the company. It's standard in a lot of drive-through establishments. Wendy's uses it. I think Taco Bell's one of them. But it's pretty standard, and there's a wire in the ground and it tracks when the car gets to the window, how long it sits at the window, and then when it leaves, and then it marks that time. So I went through for a full week at all 3 of these stores. And I did that on purpose because I didn't want any opposition to feel that we cherry picked the best data from one day. So I took a 1-week sample of all that. And as you can see, what you're looking at, oh, let me back up. What you're looking at is AM, noon, and PM. I would love to have data for you guys that shows at 7:58 in the morning, we have 8 cars in line. At 6:30, we have 4 cars in line. We don't have a system that tracks that. There may be one out there, but Dutch Bros doesn't use it. Dutch Bros doesn't even company-wide use this timer system. This is an optional system that we can put into place. And myself and I would say 12 or 13 other franchisees I know do use it, and we use it strictly for our customer to be faster and to keep them safer by not backing up onto the streets and tracking the time. So it is a measure that we've gone above and beyond with. So what you're looking at is our AM shift is from 5 a.m. in the morning to 11:59 a.m. The noon hour would be noon to 4:59 p.m. and the PM is 5 o'clock through 11 o'clock when we close. The only store that's different than that is our Milwaukee store is a 24-hour store. So they have a 4th graveyard shift, but their volume is so much higher. It's kind of an outlier when we're talking about Chinden and these other comparable stores. So basically what you're looking at, what you can see is the times. And honestly, as a business owner, I look at them and it kind of drove me nuts doing this research because our times are not super efficient at our Chinden and Vista stores. If you look at them, company standard is about 1:40 at our peak times. And if you look at the car counts, you can see our peak time is always the AM, which is pretty standard. And that's the number to really key in on because that's when we're the busiest, where we're stacking up. The noon and PM times do get higher, and I admit that. Like some of the PMs, you can see 3 minutes plus, but you have to also understand there's significantly less cars coming through in those 5 hours. So another core aspect of Dutch Bros Coffee is our customer service. So if a car pulls up and there's no car behind them, our employees are educated on sitting with that customer, talking to them. They can stay as long as they want. When the next car does pull up to them, though, they graciously ask that car to move on or however they do it to get the next car in. But that's not the reality in the morning because there's always a car behind the other one. So those are the most accurate car counts and timer counts that we can do because it's rare in the morning to not have at least 2 cars in line where we're constantly moving them on. So when you look at this, you can see the mountain home there in the middle is significantly lower, almost a minute in certain spots of efficiency faster. And that's due to the design, to be honest. Dutch Bros is, like I said earlier, it's a blessing and a curse, but Dutch Bros is a company and there's 570 some odd stores now. But we've learned that we need to be more efficient with how we work, how the store is set up and designed, because it's just not the reality. We will lose customers if we don't keep quick turnaround time. So, and I can always come back to these if you guys have questions about the numbers, but we don't need to go through every one. The main takeaway is our Mountain Home store is significantly faster than the other old, I'll call it the old Dutch Bros model. This is our Mountain Home site layout, fairly similar. Obviously every site's different, but as far as stacking, it's got about the same 11 car stacking to the end of that dumpster, which is pretty typical. That's our standard at Dutch Bros. We wouldn't be at this point of trying to build a new store if I didn't have sufficient stacking to Dutch Bros headquarters approval. They would have shut the project down and made us redesign it already. And so this is just because this is the newest one and it kind of mirrors what we're trying to do somewhat. I know the exit looks different and all that. We understand that. This is the interior of our Mountain Home location and what we are proposing for the new Chinden store. And I'm just gonna go forward one and I'll come back to this, but just comparing this is our current Chinden location. And you can see the significant difference in size and equipment. Oh, there we go. In these new designs, the highlighted area, those are the espresso machines, which obviously is our main drink producer. All the other blurry stuff is equipment and all that. But we run 3 machines out of this store. Each machine is doing a different car in lines order. And it's all based on, we have runners out in the parking lot that are taking your order. They're having you pay in the parking lot and they're staging drinks. So when you get to the window, your drink 9 times out of 10 is already made waiting for you to pull out. So This is significant because what we're trying to do with this new location is improve on our current situation. And we'll be the first to admit that our current situation is not ideal. And I think that's why we're running into some roadblocks, is because people drive down Chinden and see the line of cars. And sometimes, admittedly, the cars are stacking out and blocking Chinden. And trust me, as much as I love seeing that many cars there, I don't love seeing the cars sticking out onto Chinden and the the impact it has to this public safety. But that's why we're trying to move, because we're trying to bring the new Dutch Bros model to Garden City and service the customer that much faster. So this new design obviously helps us do that. And we've come a long ways from, that the Chinden store was the first one in Idaho, and that opened in 2007. And Dutch Bros was a much different company back then. They have multiple designs in Grants Pass and Oregon that mimic the Chinden store, and they're all getting moved or redone to meet the current standard. So we're not standing here at all saying that the current Chinden location meets standards. It doesn't. That's why we're trying to move it. So that just gives you an idea there of what we're trying to accomplish. And operationally how we do right now. You can see that this is the current Chinden. We have one espresso machine, one freeze machine, which is our frozen coffee that's here. That new store has 4 double barrels, so 6 freeze machines. So we're multiplying the equipment by 3 to 4 times. And our efficiency in the bigger building is just so much better. As far as the design, whoops, let me go all the way back. The design that it was showing, you can see the double stacking. And this is important because operationally, what we train our people on now with the 2 lanes coming in, we hate to admit that we would ever make a mistake, but we make drinks wrong sometimes, or, mess a drink up or spill a drink or anything like that. And when that car pulls up currently at our Chinden location, everybody in that line is stuck behind them because there's 1 lane in, 1 lane out. What we do, for example, in Mountain Home is if a customer pulls up and there's a hiccup with the drink order, or, they were already ordered, paid in line, and then they get to the window and their coworker called and said, hey, can you get me 5 more drinks for the girls or the guys at the office? We're a yes company. We're not going to turn them away. So that car's at the window blocking all the cars. Well, we have runners out in the parking lot that will reroute the cars behind them and safely get them off property, so that we just have a revolving door of customers, even if we have a hiccup. So this was a big thing that Dutch Bros came up with this double lane stacking. And it doesn't take much more staff or anything like that to do it. We have a runner out there and they're trained on it extensively. They have safety vests. They do what we've kind of accomplished a lot of that. So that's all we're trying to do, is move this site to make it more conducive. And honestly, when we're talking about public safety, by moving the Chinden store down the street, this solves the current safety issue at our existing location. We've even worked with ITD and ACHG or I think it was ITD at the time, but when we move, we've already agreed to close one of the entrances to our current office location to free up some of the traffic coming down Chinden. There's only gonna be 1 in and out that we'll share with our neighbors, the ProCare guys back there. And we've already dealt with that. So for future, so we're trying to ultimately make Chinden a safer corridor. And we feel this way. And to Ann's point as well, I don't anticipate ever getting over 11 cars stacked up with this new model. And the drawing here showing these cars, this is not an expectation. This was just a model shown as an exhibit for what somebody had asked for. So we showed what it would be. I own, like I said, 14 stores across the valley, and with this new model, 11 cars beyond that would be great, I guess, but it just doesn't happen. It's not a reality. So with that, there's another slide at the end, but it was just a kind of a repeat of data I gave you guys the first time. So, the only other point I'll make, the data I gave you from 12/1, on this last page, it goes on page for about 7 pages, and it is hour by or transaction by transaction, and it's very tedious to look at. But that's a report that I had to call the company to get. It's not readily available on our system. We have to stick to those AM, afternoon, and PM time breaks that we put in for the data I can pull. So they kind of did me a favor on that. That's why I can't provide as much as I'd like to, an hour by hour. It'd probably be 400 pages for you guys to look at anyway, and it's kind of tedious reading. So with that, that's pretty much everything I have. And if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. White. Does the committee have any questions for Mr. White?
I do not.
I don't either.
Hearing no questions, thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you.
At this point in time, I will open the public hearing and I will let Mr. Perry go first. Mr. Perry? Thank you. Name, well, you're already on the record. You're Mr. Samuel Perry and you work for Givens Pursley. Is that true?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you, sir. And you represent Mr. Tom Nelson.
Correct.
Thank you.
I'm gonna set a timer on my phone real quick. I don't tend to be long-winded, but I just want to make sure that.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, I assume I'm already sharing or not? I'm not? Okay. I think I remember to go here. Okay, I'm clicking on it. It's not coming up.
It needs to expand. Let's just restart.
Thank you. The record for this application is getting large, but no matter how much time you spend combing through this, you're not going to find evidence that estimates the stacking impact on this development. You will however, find evidence showing that stacking could be a problem. It's this committee's responsibility to support its final decision with substantial evidence. We think the weight of the evidence supports a denial of this application. The City Council agreed with Nelson's on appeal that the proposed design does not adhere to the standards for the protection, health, safety, and general welfare. Then on November 1st, this committee concluded that it needed more data about the impacts of stacking before it could conclude that the project adheres to the standards for the protection of health, safety, and general welfare. The question before the committee today is, since that time, have you received sufficient evidence to make a conclusion and approve this application? The applicant provided additional evidence as requested November 1st. That evidence included a site map of the proposed location, hourly gross sales data for sales made at a certain Dutch Brothers on November 28th to December 4th, data showing the service rate at the Chinden location on December 1st, 2021. The applicant also provided additional data on December 13th to include more service rate data for the Chinden, Vista, and Mountain Home locations, site layouts for the Mountain Home and Chinden locations, more hourly sales data for the Chinden, Vista, and Mountain Home locations, and another site map of the proposed locations showing stacking in the drive aisles. So at first look, it appears the applicant has provided a lot of new data, but the question is, how can you connect the new data that they've provided to the stacking impact? There are missing links in the chain of logic, which I will explain here. In their written testimony, Nelson's provided credible evidence that stacking impacts could not be estimated without some data estimating the arrival rate at the proposed location. Nelson cited a study published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers. Stacking occurs when vehicles arrive on location faster than they leave. There has been no evidence about this relationship. It does not matter whether the service time is decreased if it is still outpaced by the arrival rate. The applicant has not provided any information on the arrival rate. The applicant has ways to gather this information. For example, an employee every half hour could stick their head out the window and write down how many cars they see. They could also hire an engineer. It seems reasonable to me that when Dutch Bros is launching a completely new design after acknowledging inefficient designs in the past, that it wouldn't be unreasonable to hire an engineer. And engineers, there are engineers that study this exact thing. So without the arrival rate, the applicants have failed to provide evidence of the anticipated impacts of vehicle stacking at the proposed location. On the other hand, evidence is in the record that supports the conclusion that stacking is likely to be problematic. Nelson's summary and aerial photographs showing off-site stacking at 15 of 19 Treasure Valley locations and applicants' admissions to the same. The applicant relies on data from the new Mountain Home location with the same design. There's some differences with that site. That site appears to be part of a greater development located in a large, surrounded by a large parking area. Even still, in the written testimony submitted December 13th, Nelson's provided a sworn declaration describing how Tom Nelson visited the Mountain Home location on December 4th, 2021. He took photographs that are included in that declaration. They showed cars stacked outside the stacking lanes and far beyond the garbage dumpster that applicant pointed out constituted the end of the stacking lanes. And I would refer you to that exhibit to see those photographs. His visit to Mountain Home also raised the question of how the Dutch Brothers supply truck, when it is unloading supplies for the Dutch Brothers location at the proposed location here on Chinden, how that will affect stacking and where that supply truck will be located. In light of this evidence suggesting that stacking could cause significant offsite impacts, it's appropriate for this committee to scrutinize the project and require actual evidence of proposed stacking impacts. The data is readily available to the applicants, and they've had plenty of notice that this is an issue of concern, not just to my client, but also the city council and this committee. The Garden City Code does not allow stacking in the drive aisles. As shown here on the PowerPoint, Garden City Code 8-2C-13 subs C4 and 5, particularly 5, says the stacking lane shall be a separate lane from the circulation lanes needed for access and parking. And there was some discussion by applicants' counsel that cars waiting in line to be served at Dutch Brothers, even if they're in the access lane, could just be considered to be accessing, not necessarily stacking, maybe just accessing slower. I don't think that that is recognizing the proper definition of stacking, and that cars waiting in line off-site in those access lanes should be considered stacking, which is not permissible under the code. Stacking in the drive aisles implicates public health, safety, and welfare. If vehicles are stacking in those lanes, if they're waiting in line, however you want to characterize it, it's going to clog up those lanes. And not just the vehicles that are trying to access the nearby businesses that share those access lanes, but also any emergency vehicles, any pedestrian traffic walking from 53rd Street. I think it's also important to keep in mind that that vacant land at the end of 53rd Street is likely to be developed in the near future. And 53rd Street will become a much more busy street than it is now. I'm not going to spend time on this slide. The applicant addressed the reason for showing these on their site plan. I'm not going to go through this in much detail. I just wanted to clarify for the record that in our opinion and respectfully, when City Attorney Mr. Wadhams quoted language from an easement and said that he agreed with applicant's counsel, we feel like he may have got the two easements confused. And so this just shows kind of the geographic area that the two easements cover. The easement between the applicant and John Wood, as you can see here, is kind of this area more or less highlighted in yellow on either side of that line, actually. And then the easement, I guess, between two applicant from another entity that owns this corner lot. And that's the one that has some parking language. But as far as stacking goes, it doesn't look like it's strategically located to help mitigate any of the stacking impacts. Just checking my time. Okay, this is in the record. I'm not going to go through it. Okay, just to touch real quickly on applicants' comparison to other drive-throughs. I just think those comparisons are in opposite. The demand for the products and services are different at McDonald's than they would be at Dutch Brothers. They have indoor seating. I think the demand for McDonald's is much less than demand for Dutch Brothers. Most of the parcel sizes of those other drive-throughs they compared are much larger with more parking. So anyone that pulls up and sees big stacking can just park and go in and make their order. So I guess just to wrap up, the question before this committee is, has the applicant presented enough data for this committee to conclude that stacking will remain entirely off-site? And we, as we've argued, we don't believe that it will, that it'll be the source of off-site impacts. And so we would respectfully ask this committee to direct the applicant to redesign the project to provide more vehicle stacking, including, if there is a way to do it, for them to utilize some of that other property that's owned by another entity on the corner, or to outright deny the applications. Thank you, and I'll stand for questions.
Any questions, committee members, for Mr. Perry?
Mr. Wadhams, I have the same question of Mr. Perry that I asked Ms. Kunkel.
I yield.
Would a condition prohibiting stacking outside of stacking lanes mitigate your client's concerns?
It would not, because my client is worried that it would transfer a potential stacking problem to a potential parking problem, which parking issue is outside the scope of this meeting, so I won't go into that, but it is an issue that we remain concerned about and would likely raise in a more appropriate proceeding.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. This is a public hearing. I have one other sign-up sheet. It was filled out by John Wood. Mr. Wood, you did not indicate whether you wanted to testify, but you're standing up, so you do, I think.
The applicant also gets a rebuttal period, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Is that good? Yeah. Well, I don't know if I'm sharing still. Can you tell whether I'm sharing, Hannah?
Are you wanting to share?
Yeah, well,
You're sharing your PowerPoint.
I am? Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Wood wanted this put up, so.
Okay, sir, can you, are we good on the tech?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. thank
Okay,
you.
sir, can you say your name, spell, and give us your address?
Yeah, John Wood, 8700 Chaparral Road, Eagle, Idaho, 83616.
Thank you, sir. The floor is yours.
Okay. First of all, in regards to the Dutch Brothers, we all want to see them be successful and do a great job in the city. They've got a wonderful business and and where they're currently located, as I was told when they first approached me to purchase some property, is they expected their sales to double, possibly triple with the new location and the new corner. So with that being said, that was their expectations when they bought the property. When they also bought the property, it was one large piece. I had a bunch of different property lines from the past in the 50s, and the city allowed the lot lines to be adjusted on the property. The property is approximately over 2.5 acres. They bought just shy or right about a ½ acre of land. If you look at the easement where it says white easement, and it looks at Dutch Brothers, they purchased this together from me. Once they started bringing it through, they found out that they were having a stacking issue. And if the design review goes back to Mr. Lights's testimony on when it first came through, you will see on the record, he has said that he had 28 stacking positions. So today with Ms. Kunkel saying that don't use the word stacking, just use it as cars on the access getting to stack, it's still stacking. That's the reason Mr. Nelson is here, because at that point in time, there was some misinformation that was given to design review to make the decision, which they didn't have. The paper I brought in was to show you that stacking has always been a concern. It never was not a concern. The applicants agreed not to stack. And then when I heard in the meeting, I didn't show up to the meeting, it was during COVID. I got a voice recording and I heard the different misrepresentations on stacking and other items that aren't part of this today. But when they purchased the property, they have more, the white easement is owned by them, whether they want to put it in this company or that company, call it a different company, it's still them. That's why it says white easement on it. So if they really truly were going to be good citizens and good participants and really cared about a long term of this business instead of getting gross dollars and forget about everybody else around, they would use this land that says white easement. They could redesign this, they could double the amount of stacking, and they could have parking. And so it's in their control whether they want to do that or not. I have properties that are 60+ acres, and I get people trying to buy them from me all the time, or a portion of it, but I won't sell it because I need the parking for other events that I put on. This is a daily event. This is a daily, there's no way in the world that they can control the amount of stacking, especially with the amount of traffic and the thoroughfare that Chinden Boulevard is to the city of Boise. So,
Mr. Wood, you're over your 3 minutes. So
Okay.
can you just?
with that being said, I think the best thing, if they could use that white easement property, use it to make a Dutch Brothers that the city of Garden City could be proud of, and the city that they could be proud of themselves of what they have done without creating chaos to all the neighbors. And that's what I was represented when I sold it to them, and I'm hoping they can stand by that today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Does the committee have any questions for Mr. Wood?
I do not.
Ms. Thornborrow has something to say.
Mr. Wadham, same question as everyone. Would a signage prohibiting parking in the stacking mitigate your concerns?
Well, I believe in the conditional use permit. Already that language is in there. It says that if they stack, then they have a right to lose their conditional use permit. Like we all, when we get conditional use permits, we have to make sure. So it would be a very risky venture on their part to be able to build that, and knowing that condition is in there, knowing that. So that's why I think as businessmen, they would use this property they can currently own to use for parking, I mean, for stacking on their own land.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Those were the only two people that signed up to testify in the public hearing. Is there anybody else in person or on Zoom that would like to say something regarding this application? Now is your time. No hands up.
Not that I'm seeing.
Let the record reflect that nobody else wishes to testify in the public hearing. So the public hearing is going to end after we give Ms. Kunkel or Dutch Bros opportunity to rebuttal. And sir, if you could keep it to 3 minutes, we would appreciate it. No, you're good. You're on the record.
Okay. Just to quickly go back on some of the points. The only thing with the Mr. Woods comments is, to my recollection, I don't ever remember saying that we would double, triple sales. That would make us the highest volume store in the entire company, which is not likely. I don't remember that. If it was said, it was in passing conversation as a joke, or wouldn't that be nice? But to Mr. Perry's comments, this design is not a new design. We're not launching a new design. This design's been around Dutch Bros for about a year and a half now. There's 100+ locations that have this exact same design. And as far as hiring engineers, Dutch Bros has done that. They wouldn't have come up with this design had they not done the research before. I understand every site's different, and they can't hire an engineer that says it's perfect for every site, but our site matches their design standards for stacking, spacing, and all that. So also to that, we do acknowledge old designs are inefficient. That's exactly why we're here today. We're trying to update an old design. We have other stores in the Boise market that honestly, we're probably going to have to go down this process as well and bring it up to the new design standard. We haven't been asked to do that by our headquarter office yet, but that day may come, and we'll take those one at a time. So we 100% acknowledge, and Dutch Bros does as a whole. The Mountain Home Store, as far as the grocery outlet that's behind us with the parking, yes, that's true, but we're still limited to our lot lines and our easements out there as well. So it's very similar. Even though the space is there, we can't abuse that space. So we still have to be efficient. To address quickly the delivery truck, our current Chinden location has a delivery truck that arrives at 4:45 a.m. I have an employee that actually shows up early to meet that delivery truck. So the truck comes before hours, and I have been told by McDonald Distributing, who we use for our delivery, that schedule will not change because we're literally moving 2 properties down. So the schedule will not change for that. So it will not negatively impact anyone. They're in and out of there in 15 minutes tops, and we don't open till 5. They drop the pallets and leave, and our employees put the stock away. So, and then to the point of, we can control the traffic flow. If we have multiple locations, and I'm sure everyone here is aware of that, if we get stacked up too far, we back up onto city streets, and our employees are trained in moving those cars on. We can treat this site no differently than that as far as the easement. It's just training our employees, and they have the language. And as far as signage and all that goes, we're more than happy to. We have signage at multiple locations directing traffic. You can see it at our Broadway location and multiple others. We have no problem doing that. And I think unless there's questions, that might have been pretty much all of it. And then as far as, the development on 53rd Street, it's hard to speak to that because I don't know what's coming down the road on 53rd Street. So I don't think we should be held to a standard specifically to something that may or may not come down the road on 53rd. So there's questions, I can take them, but that was it.
I do have one question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that there's, with this design and this particular size store, there's 100 plus. I think if I'm right, you said something to that nature with this design layout, but there doesn't exist any data that would show the maximum number of cars at one time stacked based on a volume that store does?
As far as my understanding, the stores that have opened or in this design are all company operated stores. Dutch Bros has changed the model. They don't franchise anymore. It's all company owned stores, and they have the data that, to my knowledge, and we asked for it. They don't have any data as far as stacking itself. A lot of those stores do use the same timer system we have. So they have very similar data of how many cars showed up from morning to noon and how fast they were and efficient getting them through. I can tell you from experience here in Boise and the volumes we have, even at our highest volume stores, I mean, 11 cars is a lot in this new model with our runners out. And take it back 8 years ago, before we had runners out in the parking lot taking orders and doing that, yes, stacking was an issue. But with the new changes, it's just not a major issue. And I think a lot of the hiccup was showing all those cars on the site may have, scared some people on what it might be. That's not the reality of what we're looking at. So unfortunately, no, I did ask the question to our headquarter team, but they don't have specifically at certain times how many cars. The best data we can pull is how fast we are and how efficient we are when we get busy.
Okay, and another question for you. Is there one specific access in, access out that is thought to be how this will operate? Or is it kind of a free for all? There's going to be people coming 53rd Street, people coming in Shinden.
Right. So, I mean, obviously we would like to flow cars that turn off Shinden down 53rd and come in. I can't control what cars do, and we do the best we can to educate our customers on the easiest flow of the site. And we can do that. I can't speak to, I see people do crazy driving things all the time. So all we can do from our standpoint is educate via signage and word of mouth from our people on how we want people to access through. And when we move down here, we fully anticipate on having some educational type staffs out in the parking lot to help cars navigate through first time through. We do it with all of our new store openings, just to help educate people. So we'll be prepared to help for the first week or so, educating people with signage and even temporary banners, probably showing entrance, off 53rd. We'll do as much as we can, and we're perfectly open to any suggestions that you guys may have too, to help that. But we want to be customer friendly, and we want our customers to get in and out the safest and quickest possible. So we do really try to educate them. But I can't sit here and say I can guarantee that someone's not going to make a wrong turn or come in the wrong way. And we deal with that all the time.
Well, that said, I mean, is it anticipated that you might have some signage there that's directing people that Dutch Brothers access or entrance this way? Or
yeah, we actually, and we do that quite a bit. A great example, we just redid our whole system at our Broadway store about a year ago. And we have directional signs. We have do not enter signs, entrance off, the cross street. So we have a lot of that stuff. We're totally open to any type of signage. And it works pretty well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And quick question. It's safe to assume that your current Shinden clients are going to be your future Shinden clients, correct? It's not,
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I don't anticipate getting, I mean, yes, hopefully we'll get some new clientele as we grow, but yes, we're so close to where we currently are, and our customers have heard about the rumor of this possible location for a year and a half now, and they're excited about it, wondering why we're not there yet. But yes, I would anticipate 98% of the clientele down at the new site will be existing Chittenden customers, because they all come from that way for the most part anyway.
And your new store, you showed us in some slides, has 3 times the capacity of espresso machines.
Correct, as well as 5 times the frozen machines, 7 blenders compared to 2 in Chittenden right now. So everything is, yeah, and all that does is make us faster. I mean, the limitations of one espresso machine with the volume we have is rather tough, which leads to some of those long lines. And that's why Mountain Home is such a good indication of the new efficiencies of the design, and more equipment. We can turn out drinks a lot faster.
Thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions for Mr. White? Hearing none, I'm about ready to close the public hearing. Any other members of the public before I close the public hearing? Seeing none, okay, I am going to close the public hearing. And before I turn it over for deliberations, let me make a record of a couple things, just so we're clean on this. This is a remand from the city council. The city council back on well, at September 13th, remanded this with some instructions. The council wanted the committee to verify whether the size of the parcel is in compliance with the dimensional regulations. That's already been addressed. Addressing whether the proposal is the standard about non-motorized and public modes of transportation, whether that's inapplicable. And the committee has previously found that it is inapplicable. We wanted to make sure that any due process concerns have been addressed. I'm looking at my Zoom and it's still showing that we're recording. So if it's not recording, it's Zoom's fault, not the city's. It's showing recording. We are really here on the issue of health, safety, and general welfare regarding the stacking. On November 1st, the committee previously found that certain things, and so really we're just here on the one standard on the stacking and health, safety, and general welfare. I'm going to share my screen and then I'm going to turn it over to the committee. Here we go. In your packet of information, there is a proposed findings of fact, conclusions of law, and decision. And so for the remaining issue and the standards that you are to deliberate on, I wanted to put this up to aid in your deliberations. And then get to the correct standard. Standard 1, this has already been addressed. Back on November 1st, the council or the committee, excuse me, the committee moved and found that that standard was met. So now we're here. All the other standards have been taken care of previously, except for standard 2. And there is alternative language in your packet on page 11 of the draft decision document. It's standard 2. And the standard is whether or not it meets this standard. There's alternative language in your packet, and I'll just keep it up for your deliberation, committee members. So the issue is, does it comply or does it not comply? That's what we're here for today. And with that, I'll turn it over to the committee for deliberations. Thank you.
Mr. Wadhams.
Ms. Thornborrow.
As to Mr. Wood's testimony, I was able to look up on the Garden City website the conditions of approval for the conditional use, the associated conditional use permit. The first site-specific condition, AI, notes that the site shall be designed so that the stacking does not create an impact off-site. And then general condition number 25 of the decision document notes, paraphrase, that a conditional use permit can be revoked for failure to abide by conditions, just for the record.
Thank you, Ms. Thornborrow. Committee, it's your deliberation. Thank you.
I think one thing of note is what Jenna just did talk about, of the conditional use mentioning the stacking and, at the expense of, putting that at jeopardy, the applicant's going to do everything they can to avoid that, right? And then it was discussed earlier, a potential condition of approval, that there was signage, that there was things that the runners, it sounds like from the testimony of the applicant that 100% of the time there's runners out there interacting with the people in their cars. So should stacking come up to, the point where it may go into the access easement, then the runners can, chat with the customers and give them an out and instruct them where to go, what to do. That's my first thought.
Yeah, I guess I would agree that, having that provision in place in the CUP for revocation, if there's impacts from stacking, that in my mind makes a little bit of a difference, because I think that given the throughput of the design, the double lane, so the increased capacity at which they can service patrons, and in addition to that, the willingness to add some signage, I think some directional signage, so that customers were knowledgeable about the way to access the site, that would make it the easiest way for the runners out there to facilitate moving people along and not creating an additional problem with, I think, multiple cars accessing from both different directions. It already seems to create a kind of an impact for accessing the stacking lanes, that if that could be dealt with through the added signage, and through the runners out there helping to facilitate, I think that I guess eases the my concern with health, safety, and welfare, with that added condition of the signage and the provisions for complying and the CUP revocation.
So I would have liked to have seen actual data showing how long cars are there and how many are stacked at any one given time, in the mountain home location. However, I also think the applicant has provided enough information to demonstrate that there should not be any adverse impacts from the stacking through the operational efficiencies that they're installing in this location, having the runners, and then the willingness to put in the sign. So I would be open for a motion.
I just want to add first on that data, we do have Chinden data, and we do have evidence that there's going to be, quite a large increased capacity in the new facility. And then I think we can take and do math, and I was doing some math on my own, but I don't want to subject my math to public record. We can all do our own math. But if we take the block of time that is AM and say there's that many minutes in the AM, and then we take 148 cars times 2 minutes and 16 seconds, we can say that that's a block of time if you push it all into one car. And, then say, okay, we could have 11 of those cars stacked up in this lane before it goes into the drive aisle. I don't see any of those blocks of time on Chinden where we're getting close to using the capacity of, 11 stacked spots. So I think there is enough data. I guess that's the long and short of it. I think there is enough data that has been presented in the testimony, in the PowerPoint, and who has better evidence than the applicant who's there running the ship. So I I trust what's been presented to us as presented.
I might add that in looking at some of the draft potential language, and that I believe that it's no longer part of the discussion that the ability to use the access easement for stacking is intended to be considered.
Correct. That last little part of the in approval verbiage.
Yes.
Well, if that's it for discussion, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but if that's it for discussion, I would entertain a motion by roll call on standard number 2, whether the proposed design adheres to the standards for the protection of health, safety, and general welfare. And depending on what the motion may or may not be, then we have to decide whether the committee likes the proposed wording from staff or whether the committee would like to add or modify some of the wording, but I would entertain a motion.
While you're entertaining that motion, Mr. Wadhams, this committee is accustomed to me trying to summarize what I think I've heard. And so reasonings that I think that I've heard, aside from noting that there's adequate data, is based on the conditional use requirements, the potential to add directional signage, the runners and the practices that can help flow, the site being designed with the double lane access, which increases capacity, and increased equipment, increasing capacity.
That is a motion that I will make with those findings. I move to approve let's see here. Finding that the standard 2 is met. The proposed design adheres to standards of protection of health, safety, and general welfare with those added conditions.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Let's do a roll call. Committee member Gresham.
Aye.
Committee member Labrie.
Aye.
And then committee member Hurd.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 3-0. Application approved as conditioned. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. And I will be taking back over as meeting, and that will take us on to discussion item DSR fiscal year 2020 number 19, a discussion related to landscape and sidewalk. And I think it looks like Mr. Jed Glavin is coming up to address the committee. I think we had 2 members present when this item was briefly discussed in November related to an existing design review approval for split rail off of Chinden. Turn it over to you.
Yes. Do I need to introduce myself or anything, or?
Your name and address for the record.
Sure. I'm Jed Glavin. Address is 4338 Chinden Boulevard, Garden City, Idaho, 83714 is our current business address location. So I'm going to just run through the quick process of approval that we've gone through first. So everybody kind of understands why we're bringing this up and why it's even an issue. So to start things out, we submitted a concept design of our site and our proposal to the design review committee. Of course, in that concept design, we kind of identified an unidentified size landscape buffer in there. It wasn't meant to be sized appropriately. We put it in there as a concept. We got approval from the design review committee for that design, kind of moved forward. And then after that point, our architects and engineers kind of started digging through sidewalk code and standards and didn't see a requirement for a landscape buffer. So as a result, we kind of changed our plans. Deleted the buffer due to concerns that we kind of had with maintenance and functionality of the buffer. Submitted our final plans to the city, and we got approval of our final plans, our final permit plans, without the landscape buffer in there. So as we move forward, we constructed the sidewalk. We're at a stage where we're 70% through construction. Constructed the sidewalk without the landscape buffer. And then after the fact, got a call from somebody at the city that said, hey, we just noticed that there's no landscape buffer in your sidewalk. We're at the point where we might need to completely demolish your sidewalk, dig it back up and start back over. So that's where we're at, even though we were kind of caught this after the fact, after we're through construction of it. We came up with some concept plans, and we've gone back and forth with both Jenah and Hanna at Garden City to try to find a solution that has a little bit of landscape buffer, a little bit of trees, but it is more functional for the site. We've gone through various iterations and changed it a couple different times based on what the staff sees as appropriate and then what the design review committee sees as appropriate. So as that's kind of where we're at right now. I do want to say that we sent along the sidewalk construction standards to everybody today that are the Garden City sidewalk construction standards that actually state the area between the sidewalk and curb or travelway may be landscaped or hardscaped. A landscape buffer may be more appropriate to residential or low intensity uses, while a hardscape buffer may be more appropriate to a commercial or a high intensity use. So I would say that we're proposing to be a relatively high intensity commercial use. We also passed along our ACHD trip generation rates. They're estimating that we're going to generate 120 trips or something a day. So there is going to be some intensity there. I think we're at the point where we really feel like a hardscape is a more appropriate use on the site. I do want to reiterate that we're totally willing to work with you guys. We want to find a solution that looks good for Garden City. Our business has been here forever. We stayed and remained in Garden City and decided to build a new facility in Garden City because we like it here. But we want to find a reasonable use for it. I personally don't think that a landscape buffer between the street and the sidewalk is going to be super functional. I think people can still park along 32nd Street. They're going to park and step out of their car and step into the landscape buffer and get, wood chips or whatever kind of finish we have in that landscape buffer all over the place. We're of course in charge of maintaining the landscape buffer. So the trees, little bushes, I think we're talking about low-lying bushes at this point. Will have to be maintained, watered, all that stuff. So we're really kind of wanting to seek a more functional, reasonable solution at this point than completely tearing up the sidewalk that we've already poured just to get this small landscape buffer in there. And see if you guys have any ideas or, input on how we can make something happen that might be a little bit more functional. Personally, I think trees are great. I think trees in the sidewalk would be good, but this little strip of landscape buffer honestly just doesn't make sense functionally. So that's where we're at.
And I do apologize in that I started this out saying, please give your name and address for the record. which is always a great thing to have. But this is not a public hearing. It's a discussion. It can be less formal. So I'll turn it over to the committee for discussion. And then, well,
Did you finish, Jenna?
I did. Thank
Oh,
you.
okay, sorry. Yeah, I think, it's obviously unfortunate that this happened, and Jed, I think you summed it up. One of the first things you said was the architects and engineers didn't see the requirement, but it seems to me they're the same ones that drew it correctly in the first place. When we saw it and when we approved it through design review with a landscape buffer, that was that's the way that it should have continued along the path as it, I don't know that it changed hands amongst architects and engineers, but at some point it went from landscape strip to hardscape. And it's an unfortunate omission.
Yeah, I think, I'm gonna be totally honest and straight with you guys. I mean, we're both a little bit to blame in that, we made the change without conferring with Garden City to make sure, hey, that change works. So we just made the change, submitted the plans, but then they didn't get caught in the permit plans. So we're like in this kind of conundrum spot, right, where we're catching it after construction. We've already spent a significant amount of money to lay the sidewalk. So really we're at this point where it's like, what kind of solution can we find without having to rip the whole thing up? That can still be functional, that can still be pretty, again, street trees, I think are a great option. But I think we're just looking for something a little bit more reasonable. After talking with our contractors, they are basically telling us it's going to be cheaper to rip the whole sidewalk completely up than to try to cut out a small buffer at this point. So basically, we're just going to have to demolish everything that's there and start from ground zero again to install this buffer and, et cetera. So searching for a more reasonable solution, possibly. John, did you have any input you wanted to throw in here?
Yeah, just a couple comments. We have Ben Simple on the line too, as a landscape architect. So when we did the design review set, I think it showed we had to scale it because there was never a dimension. A very skinny landscape buffer, which doesn't meet any standard either. It was really kind of a graphical representation. So it was there, but really it didn't work for a tree grate. So then we got working on the project, civil engineer that does a lot of work here said, an attached sidewalk would be appropriate. The city would support it. So it wasn't like we didn't talk about it. And then there is the piece in the sidewalk standards, that says, that may be appropriate in a commercial or high intensity use. So that does seem to be this case. It is adjacent to an arterial, or it is on the arterial. The pedestrian experience is absolutely important there. And there is parking on 32nd. So it does help kind of provide sort of the intent of what a landscape buffer would do to get you just a little bit away from the traffic there on 32nd. So with the cars, it does give that little bit of, and then we were also thinking, well, I know there's a lot of talk about the corner and how that looked. We had a little more chance to soften and landscape the corner of the building sort of visually when the sidewalk was over. So we did have the small one there. A lot of places too, there's, streetscape maps where it's very clear, on what street exact, what sidewalk, what streetscape you need to provide. So here it was not necessarily clear. We had sort of two things in the sidewalk standard that seemed to be an option. So we submitted it that way, didn't hear anything. And I know during the DR hearing, there was never comments or anything specific about that as well. So it is unfortunate.
I'd like to ask a question for staff. The landscape strip requirement that we're talking about, is it the one that is required between parking and the sidewalk, or the other side of the sidewalk between the sidewalk and the street?
Isn't it not just a landscape strip, but what we're required here is a detached sidewalk.
Yeah, I'm confused on what exact regulation we're talking about here.
What I'm going to ask is if we can pull up perhaps first, the sidewalk regulations or the sidewalk plan. But yes, a detached sidewalk is required. And then we have how to interpret that in that code requirement in the sidewalk policy. And then secondarily to Maureen's question, yes, we require that there is the street tree buffer between the travel lane and the sidewalk. And then before I started speaking, I had whispered to Hannah if she might be able to pull up the most current proposal by the applicant. So we have something to be able to talk specifically to.
And Hannah, what's pulled up on the screen right now, where does, you can go to that section where it talks about the hardscape may be appropriate. Where does that occur?
It's on, should be on page 6 of the sidewalk standard. Yep, that's perfect right there.
Yeah, I guess maybe it is this, I guess question to staff is this then maybe in conflict a little bit with the requirement for a detached sidewalk? To allow that portion in between the sidewalk and the back of curb to just be hardscape instead of getting that landscape element that separates the two. Because it's definitely a different feel for hardscape. And I guess I'm just trying to get my head around how this and the other requirement that we just looked at.
I guess I might throw an opinion out there that you may or may not agree with. I would say if there is a quote unquote detached sidewalk in the area between that sidewalk and the travel way is hardscaped, it would become more of a furniture zone. Perhaps you'd have your streetlights in there, you'd have your, if there would be waste receptacles, more of a downtown type of treatment. I think to your point, there's nothing in there saying that there needs to be some delineation between the sidewalk and the hardscape, such as pavers or something along those lines.
So then I guess in my mind, then I'm thinking about, okay, how does that set the stage for consistency in the streetscape design as you move down the street? What does that mean? If it's in these areas that tend to be more commercial, then would you want kind of all to be a hardscape where you have that furniture area and that's the kind of streetscape design that's more appropriate there, not necessarily flopping back and forth between, well, one here we've got the hardscape used, and then right next to it now we've transitioned back to the standard landscape element there and not hardscape, and then we're flopped back and forth to the other and vice versa on down the street.
Right. That's what this non-compliance sets up the neighbor, if they're in compliance, to be awkward. And that's not fair to that next neighbor. And as far as kind of the furniture strip, we did talk, and I think, and it was approved as such in the Casino Beach, the area at the end of the cul-de-sac, I believe, the street transitions to furniture zone, transitions to sidewalk, if I remember correctly. And that's, I think, where that comes into play and where that's appropriate is the kind of downtown dense, it's 5 stories on each side. It's more of a pedestrian zone feel. I don't get that feel here or anywhere down 32nd Street.
Okay, so can we then pull up the current proposed plan and talk about?
Yeah, let's do that. I did just want to go back to that last sentence of that last piece on 6 though, real quick. It
Sure.
does say landscape buffer may be more appropriate to a residential or low intensity use, while the hardscape more appropriate for commercial or high intensity. This is commercial and it's right on the corner of Chinden. Seems like it's the latter.
And Jenna, do you have any insight on the construction standards versus the other section that we're looking at? Because this specifically mentions ACHD and ITD. And I know there's some discrepancies between what they allow versus what Garden City requires, right? Garden City requires more of our sidewalks and landscape buffers than ACHD or ITD would. Is this section, did this evolve from ITD and ACHD construction standards?
I'll try to answer your question. Although, ACHD and ITD standards and Garden City standards are different, all 3 of them. And so in regards to ACHD, because this is ACHD specifically that we're talking about on 32nd Street, they don't require that buffer, whereas Garden City requires that detached sidewalk treatment. And then while we're having this conversation, I think that there's an interesting situation because ACHD is in the process of redesigning that street right now. And I can tell you discussions that have occurred at ACHD that I've been present at. We're looking at the design review detached with landscaping, saying, let that go because this application predates them looking at redesign. But the discussion is to do design more akin to the 36th Street, not with the drainage, but with having bulb outs with the street trees and the bulb outs and on-street parking. To further complicate that, I apologize to everyone. I've had discussions with ACHD that I've discussed with this committee where it's my understanding, my takeaway is the city cannot compel individuals to do the bulb outs with the trees with the on-street parking to match the very likely design of the street.
Can you scroll back to the other section that you had it on originally? And forgive me for some of these questions, because I don't think I was present when you originally discussed this. So what you're proposing, the sidewalk is up against the road and it's only 5 feet, or is there, how much room is in between? There we go.
Yeah, well, maybe we could walk through, let's walk through the iterations here. That would be good.
Do you want me to start on this top one?
Yeah, let's go to the very beginning here, design review. Let's see. Oh, yep, there we go. Yep, so this was kind of the early, when we came in for design review. This is what we had shown on the landscape plan. And I do think Ben Semple, he may still be on the line if he could speak to this if we ask. We start with little landscape buffer. That doesn't really meet any standard. I think that scales out at 3 feet. We don't have a dimension on it, but it is not attached or properly detached. I think what we were talking more was about the corner and how we sort of, make up the landscape and avoid our irrigation box. And then we also had a sort of a canal through the property that we needed to work with. And then going to the next one, what we submitted for permit. This shows the attached sidewalk 5 feet. We have a landscape, and trees and buffer to kind of soften before the building and that planter box. And then the gate in the corner that we spent quite a bit of time talking about at design review. So then this is what we submitted permit, and this is what is constructed right now. So let's go down to the next one. And I think it wasn't until it was complete that then we, got some comments that possibly there was an issue with it. Working with staff, we discussed kind of an option that I think we were hearing, might be acceptable that staff was going to bring to the design review committee. This was the first one, and I think we were showing a 2-foot buffer. We brought the trees towards the street and then had the sidewalk step back. We got feedback that was not going to work, and that what about 3 feet, because that's what the original drawing scaled to. So we had this one now with a 3-foot buffer. Again, the trees shown there, and we start to lose a little bit of the planting near the planters. And then we were, under the assumption that this might be an acceptable way to go. We just got talking, what does that landscape buffer really become? If the cars are parked there, people are going to step right out, step right, whatever's on there. So it's not really effective. We'd almost rather that be a bigger hardscape than just a very small strip. So we wanted to bring this back to you guys before we, have to go demo it and then find out what, what's going to be acceptable. We would like to work with it. Here it is. I think this meeting here has already shown it's somewhat unclear, where there's a little bit of exactly what is the solution on 32nd. A lot of places it says, here's exactly what you need to provide on any given street. There's no confusion whatsoever. That's what you have to provide. Here we were looking at, different language, and so this is where we are.
Question, how wide is it supposed to be for it to be considered a detached sidewalk? Is there a minimum width?
Well, it on page 6.
I'm sorry, that's for staff.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
What the committee typically defers to is the ACHD standards for trees. So it's 6 or 8, depending on root barrier. But I don't know that we have anything that we've ever documented noting this is the exact number. I do know that most people default to 6 or 8 if they don't put that barrier in.
Okay, so one quick question, sorry, for Jenah and Hannah. How many street trees are required along 32nd?
So there's definitely one required, and then for every 50 linear feet, there's an additional one class 1 street tree or frontage tree required.
So how does the proposal, can you scroll back to what you're proposing to do? I think it was the last one. So how does that not meet the standards? I guess I'm confused.
So it wouldn't meet the standards by not proposing the 6 or 8 foot landscape buffer. And then it looks like they do propose the 5 foot wide sidewalk required. So essentially it's the landscape buffer that's not as wide as we typically see.
Can I clarify? And that's the ACHD landscape for trees, not something that's spelled out in Garden City Code or policy, just as a clarification.
So
And
according to Garden City policy, because the area between the sidewalk and the street is not grass or landscape, that's the issue. And I apologize, I'm not trying to be difficult, but I'm really trying to figure out what exactly they're not meeting.
I think it's the attached versus detached. So it's all concrete now attached to the curb.
Right, but if that becomes a furniture zone,
Well, then you have a 3 foot furniture zone and then a 5 foot sidewalk and then I think we would get into looking at what is in the furniture zone and how does that function and et cetera.
or something that delineates it differently from the sidewalk.
Right.
But if you have a 5 foot sidewalk and you have 3 additional feet,
Right.
the intent to me is that it's meeting the requirements. And I realize that's going to kind of create some or raise some questions and questions later. But
And what has a furniture zone looked like in the past? What's it look like on past approvals?
good
Is it-
question. I don't know that we've done that.
I think where I would say we recently have is the Casino Beach area, and we can pull those up as maybe
And-
looking.
Yeah, and the specific area plan in the entire
Sure.
length of 34th Street, right?
But I don't know that it actually does anything to delineate it differently. Other than that was the expectation, is the furniture zone.
Well, I'm just looking at an aerial here and on that side of the street, there's only one parcel between it and the parcel that's on the corner of 32nd and Clay, which has attached sidewalk all the way along the front of it. And so,
Yeah, I think there's 2.
is there 2 parcels there? It looks like one import engine supply.
Yeah, and then there's another chain link fence one. I'm going from memory.
Okay.
I think that just got
I think it's 3
approved
lots.
for, oh no, maybe it was on 33rd.
So we've got a large section of attached already on that side of the street.
I think that as long as they're meeting the tree requirements, and those are gonna have to either be bulb outs or bulb ins or whatever you wanna call them. You know, how they have it designed, or maybe potentially a bolt out at Osage and Chinden. But as long as they're meeting the street trees and they delineate that area as a furniture zone with either different material or something of that nature, I would not have any issue with this.
So you're proposing they cut the 5-foot sidewalk at 3 feet from the curb, tear that out, make it brick or permeable pavers or something that's delineated different. And then they keep 2 feet of existing sidewalk and add 3 feet to that. So 3-foot strip of brick, 2-foot strip with an attached 3-foot strip. That is the new 5-foot sidewalk.
I don't know that they would have to tear anything up. I mean, they could put street furniture there. They could put markings, artwork.
With something like a bench, artwork, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Are you guys referencing a standard for the hardscape design that you guys are talking about? Is there a standard that you guys use for, like you talked about, creative hardscapes opposed to concrete?
I think the dilemma that's being discussed right now, and the committee can stop me if I'm not interpreting this correctly, is that how do you delineate a detached sidewalk versus an attached? And if it's considered a furniture zone, how do you create that as a furniture zone? And so what is that? But does Garden City have standards for a furniture zone identified? The answer is no.
So I just have a quick question. If we go back to that page 6. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So that top bullet, I guess the second sentence, if the sidewalk is adjacent to a curb or arterial roadway, that would be this. It should be 7 feet in width and free of obstructions. So then if we couple that with the last bullet, the landscape buffer may be more appropriate on a residential low intensity. That's not this. While a hardscape may be more appropriate in high commercial or high intensity. So it would seem to me 7 feet hardscape would be kind of following the rules, at least from what we have written down here, based on the standards. Unless I'm missing it. Because
that doesn't constitute a detached sidewalk though.
Right, and basically what the first bullet is saying, that if you're 5 feet on a collector road, but your sidewalk should be 7 feet, and if it's detached, then you need an additional amount of space, whether it's hardscape or soft. Wider sidewalk for a busier road.
And I guess allowing that 3-foot section, as you had in the one exhibit there, allowing that 3-foot section to be hardscape, but different than just sidewalk. Because if it's concrete poured in with the rest of the 5-foot sidewalk, then it's attached sidewalk. It's not detached sidewalk. So in order for it, in my mind, in order for it to be compliant with detached sidewalk would be that is hardscape of a different element material than the sidewalk. I mean, I think otherwise it's not a detached sidewalk with hardscape. It's just a larger sidewalk attached. And then if hardscape's acceptable there, is that doing anything with the issue of having to remove sidewalk and in order to get there?
Would
Which
you
is
guys
like-
consider like some sort of stamped concrete on the western side of what we've got poured? Or do you want stamped stuff right at the curb adjacent to 32nd? So if we could add another whatever 2 or whatever 3-foot section onto what we've got that's stamped. So we have kind of some variation in design and feel of the walkway. Do you guys feel like we could make that work?
I'm not sure what you're talking about, but I don't think so. Western is closer to the building, correct? Not closer to the street.
Yes.
Yeah.
So no, the purpose of a detached sidewalk is to separate the pedestrian walkway from the street with something. Typically landscaping. If you're going to do hardscape, then there's got to be a purpose to it. It has to look different so that people know that they don't need to walk there. You can put furniture there, you can put artwork there, you can put landscaping there, but that's the purpose of having the detached sidewalk.
And I heard a suggestion over on the side, concrete staining might be a suggestion.
I think that's
Sure.
a reasonable solution.
I would be fine with concrete staining. I do think there needs to be a little bit. So I think something needs to go in that area, whether it's artwork, a bench, trash receptacle, something that delineates it as a furniture zone or separate, in addition to a different material or a different color.
I would actually think that maybe that section that's in between the two tree wells has a greater potential for something of that nature, because we're only talking about a 3-foot space on either side of that. But on that portion, you've got the extra depth of the tree wells that kind of lend itself to you still maintaining the 5-foot sidewalk around it, but having a greater area that could be conducive to artwork or some kind of furnishing.
Yeah, I think that where this is going is, you know, a stained delineation on what is poured there. But Brett, what you just said, I think I like, because if we can stain and basically it gives us a 5-foot detached sidewalk and then it gives us 5 foot of detachment and then 5 foot of sidewalk. If we stain what's there and then put the new sidewalk inboard of the tree wells and the 5-foot sidewalk that's there already. And then there's not like, because right now there's a 5-foot attached sidewalk. And I don't think staining 3 feet of that and then adding 3 foot to the western side of that is going to do anybody any favors aesthetically. Right. And so what staining what is there also does is then it creates this furniture zone, because we have 5-foot tree wells in that 5-foot. In the first 5 feet that we're talking about, we already have the 5-foot tree wells. So it makes itself a furniture zone in that the tree wells are blocking it from becoming a traffic zone. So we have new furniture, we have new artwork, we have tree wells making this the detachment.
I'll go along with that, because generally speaking, your furniture zone should be 5 feet.
Well, yeah, and theirs
depth.
is actually 6 feet deep here. Because those tree wells are 5 by 6 is what they're showing, at least when you can read the dimensions on the exhibits that I have received.
Oh, so the wells are 6 feet east-west and the sidewalk is 5 feet east-west.
Correct.
But as of today, those tree wells are not there. Those are proposed to be cut in. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true. They're drawing right now.
So they could, I would imagine they could be cut in 5 feet and then they're not like having a 1 foot little bump out around them.
But it goes all the way down here. It won't sustain it. We do have, we're just drawing on the map right now. We have a constraint there because there's a big, huge concrete planter box right west of what you're talking about there. I think there's enough space to have this 5 foot stained buffer, but we are dealing with a little bit of constraint there on the site that.
The sidewalk's against the big box.
Yes. The sidewalk would probably go right up all the way against the box. And we did have plantings right next to that box to kind of soften it a little bit. So you would lose those plantings, I believe.
I guess I'm looking right here just at what's pulled up there on the shared screen. And just thinking if you took that configuration, but where you've got that different hatch pattern, which is kind of that detached buffer area, that's all the stained. And then you just widen it in between the 2 tree wells. You just widen that stained area towards the building, the full width of the tree wells, just in that section. The rest of it stays like it is. I guess that's my thought.
The stained area is the attached though, right? The stained area is what's attached now.
Yes, correct. So all that, the kind of honeycomb hatched area up on the screen or on that, which is the landscape buffer between the sidewalk and the back of curb. That's what I guess was anticipating. We were talking about being that stained element, and then in between the 2 tree wells, that area is wider because it's the full width of the tree wells. It becomes the furniture kind of zone. Let me see.
Yep. I thought we were talking furniture zone encompassing all of what is poured now. And then sidewalk being west of that, a 5 foot sidewalk being west of that.
I think we understand what was being said. I wonder if, just for clarification, if we could then draw that up, give it to staff, and maybe they could pass it to you guys in the next few days, and we get some comments back to see if we have that correct.
Yeah, and I'd like, I mean, if furniture zone is what we're saying and talking about, I'd like to see that furniture design as well, right? What's going in there and what makes it this sort of transition of, hey, I got out of my car, texting my friend, waiting to meet them before I go in, or waiting on the bench for the Uber, that sort of thing. I want to see that as the functional space that we're all talking about, as kind of this compromise to using what's there.
And you're talking about using the space in between the 2 tree wells, Derek? Is that what you guys are talking about? Is the
in my mind, what is poured is furniture zone, and sidewalk is inboard towards the site, towards the west of what is poured.
And what is poured currently is 5 feet.
It is, but I guess it was, I thought maybe Brett was saying something different.
Yeah, I was. Can you stop sharing your screen there and I can just share mine real quick and show you what I was talking about, please? Thank you.
Brett, while you're pulling that up, I actually am with Derek on this. If there's a way to take what is already poured now, make that the furniture zone, stamp it, color it, whatever, and then pour an additional 5 feet beyond that. If they can manage to do that within the constraints
So
of the site, that would be ideal.
Are you guys seeing my screen?
Yep.
We can see the blue. I guess we like the blue because it fills in right there. We understand furniture's a nice spot. If you keep tracking that down, we have no planting there for where the parking interacts, and all of a sudden there's really no softening of the site anywhere. We have no opportunity to kind of plant, and we would just have, I think what's there, if there's a bench that's in the blue, that has a nice simple flow.
And there's plants in between the planter and then also an area for plants around the irrigation box. There at the left of your screen, there's plantings there that kind of cover that up. And then of course the plantings around the parking area too. So it gives us a chance to kind of shade some of those other hardscapes.
And
landscape.
I would rather see those plantings closer to the street because that's what I'm concerned about protecting, not necessarily your site per se.
Yeah, and what was this hatched area when this came in? When this was presented, the hatched area is,
I think it was grass.
yeah.
Oh,
And Brett, in your blue rectangle fill in, I don't see how that detaches the sidewalk anywhere but in that area.
well, if this is a different material, I think that's what we were saying. If it's a hardscape material, so it's not just this blue, it's everything.
You're adding to that. Yeah.
So I'm just expanding this area out to the tree wells to create enough space in here to actually do some type of furniture element or artwork or what have you. But this is just the different colored stamped, stained concrete all the way down that provides that hardscape buffer.
Gotcha.
Versus a landscape buffer.
Gotcha.
And so I guess that was my thought, was that instead of pushing all this sidewalk up against here and having that kind of relationship to the existing box that's there and no separation from a little bit of buffer from this raised planter element, and then having real issues down here where you don't even have any space to do anything.
What I'm concerned about is if we do this, there's nothing to say that other people can't come in and say, we're not going to do landscaping other than a few tree wells. We're going to do a hardscape and we're going to submit 3 feet, and you can't deny that because you approved it here.
I agree with that. Not only that, it also brings up we put it in wrong, we're sorry, let's find a solution that's easier and cheaper than taking it out and doing it the right way. Which is, unfortunate and sad and hard to say, but that's the reality.
How do we figure out then how to make this staining that you guys are proposing something unique? I think is something kind of worth exploring if we have an opportunity to maybe do something pretty creative.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of things here that I'm wrestling with, is that the sidewalk, I don't know whether it was the standard or what have you, that basically speaks to the ability to utilize hardscape instead of softscape, if you will, landscaping in that zone when we have a detached sidewalk. And then to basically say that, well, that's not applicable, and it has to be softscape type of landscaping. So where does that other one apply? If it applies in only certain street type, more, how we say, dense commercial settings, like in other areas where there is a streetscape design, if that's the only place that applies, it seems to me then you could utilize that same rationale for deciding or looking at the whole street in totality and seeing what's happening on that street or that side of the street in making a rationale of whether hardscape is appropriate versus the softscape or not. So does it make sense here on this particular street in this particular location? Because I always think we're looking at contextually what's happening, as well as not necessarily setting a precedence, because this is in a different context here than, say, another location which is primarily residential. And
right. And you know, if you bring up and look at the Casino Beach example, you know, that the intention of that is that whole end of the street where this kind of street profile is proposed, you know, part of the proposition of that too is that street is closed and it's a, you know, block party basically. So, you know, shrubs and grasses and, you know, things like that aren't conducive to that entire area becoming a block party or a concert or, you know, the farmer's market, let's say. So I think that where we've looked at it and where it worked and was successful was that it's an intensive kind of commercial on both sides of the street, 4 stories, 5 stories, lots of activity, lots of traffic, not this, you know, entry with one entity on the corner. So I mean, I think I can get to furniture zone, but it has to be a, you know, authentic furniture zone with enough space for furniture and enough space for that to function. And I don't know that staining 3 feet and then putting an additional 3 feet on the backside, I can't see how that's any more cost effective or easy than taking it out and doing it right. It looks like the patch that it is.
Do we need to summarize, or does the applicant have enough information to work with staff on something? I mean, where are we going from here?
I think that I would like to reiterate that this is kind of a special circumstance, right? That I don't think it's going to set a standard because of the circumstance in where we're at. They were coming in after the fact, after construction, and trying to finish or to finalize an issue. Also reiterate again too, that there are some issues with what's written in the sidewalk standards that can be translated in various different ways that we're kind of struggling with and trying to work with and find a reasonable solution here. I think that there's, you know, and I'm not completely sure I got a clear answer on what was going on with the 32nd Street improvements. I think that would maybe be worth discussing a little bit more. Did you say that they were considering bulb outs all the way along the street, Jenna? Or not for new construction or?
They are, so you have two separate departments at ACHD. It's my understanding that 32nd, there are 35% plans. I think I may have sent it to individuals that have property adjacent to 32nd Street, showing bulb outs. In the meeting I was in, because your property had approved plans, the discussion was to leave the first property on both sides and go with whatever you had proposed. It's also my understanding that ACHD is not allowing for Garden City to allow for bulb outs at this point in time. That it's another discussion. Should you be able to discuss the situation with ACHD? Would the committee be okay with bulb outs to match the rest of the anticipated street? Sorry, I know we've just had a long conversation. My hunch is, I have a very strong hunch based on a meeting that I had with them, is they'll likely say that that's outside of the parameters of something that they could allow an individual development to do.
Is bulb outs.
To meet your tree requirements, because we've had 2 other applications run into that in a somewhat recent timeframe.
Got it. And the bulb outs would be for parking, like they'd bulb out some spots on the street that people could pull into and park.
It's, if you want to look at what that treatment looks like, 36th Street has that. So there's parking interspersed with bulb outs with street trees.
Sure. And who's the project manager there at ACHD?
The one working on 32nd Street design, his name is Jason Tugby, but he's outside of the plan reviewers for redevelopment projects. So that's a separate department.
Sure. Yeah. I think that might convolute the issue a little bit more if we tried to communicate with them. It sounds like it's not an option. So I would probably be preferable to just find a solution based on our current circumstance and situation that we're in right now, post-construction, to try to make this, you know, the best we can make it and follow the standards that we have available.
Jenna, what is the proposed design for the rest of 32nd Street?
I don't remember. I know that there's a new proposed 5-year work plan that's out. Originally, it had been proposed for this year or 2022. I think it's pushed back to 23 for design. Again, I don't know ACHD's policies well enough to speak to them directly. I don't know if in a situation like this, if there'd be some sort of construction, what is the word? Not in bonding, but along those lines that would be available, especially since it's not programmed yet for construction. I suspect that's not an option available either.
Construction bond. What, no, but do they have a recommended cross section?
They do, at 35%. Everything that I'm going to say north of this property, well, that's not exactly right, is showing bulb outs in the 35% plans that I've seen.
Okay, so the 35% complete plans are showing bulb outs, but you're saying that ACHD would likely not allow them to have bulb outs? I'm not sure I understand.
Correct. What I understood from the meeting that I had with ACHD, even if there is a road designed utilizing bulb outs, they do not have policies in place to allow for any redevelopment to meet their landscaping standards, which is how they would view a request, by adding a street tree and a bulb out adjacent to their property.
Okay, so they plan on doing bulb outs, but they're not going to let other people do bulb outs in redevelopment.
That is
I'm not
how
su-
I understood the meeting that I had.
But if this property had likely been part of their review, then they would likely have 35% plans would likely show bulb outs on this.
Unfortunately, I would presume that, yes.
But I mean, obviously we don't know, and if it's at 35%, they could change.
Correct.
I'm just, I feel like whatever we propose here is gonna look like a sore thumb without knowing where ACHD is going. Have they commented on this?
I will say that I have tried to contact Jason Tugby at least 3 or 4 times, and he will not return my calls or my emails. So I've reached out. I wanted to coordinate with him too, because I'm trying to find a solution here. We're trying to move forward so we can lay concrete before it's too cold to do that. And really, I kind of just want an answer, but he hasn't communicated. So staff, I'll let you guys answer too. Sorry.
And on that, hold on that 35% plan, something just occurred to me. On the property directly north-ish of this, is it an attached sidewalk or detached?
Depending on your definition, if it's with bulb outs, some people with ACHD would call that an attached sidewalk with bulb outs. This committee has noted in the past that serves as like a detached sidewalk because you have that street tree parking buffer.
But on their 35% complete plans, the sidewalk is on the curb, except where there's a bulb out.
Correct. Mhm. From
Like-
memory.
like
And I
36.
can send the plans to the committee.
So what is actually constructed there now, while not complying with our regulations, actually is more consistent with what ACHD plans for the remainder of the road. Currently plans at 35% complete, which could change, other than a bulb out.
Dependent, because as is right now, without doing some sort of tree grate or taking out some of that sidewalk, the trees would need to be on the other side as currently constructed. Whereas the intent for ACHD's 32nd Street design, there would be the bulb out having the street tree between the travel lane and the sidewalk.
Is there a huge time push on this, or is there time to talk with ACHD? If you could get them to return your call.
I mean, we've been talking about this for a month and a half probably, and I haven't been able to get a hold of Jason Tugby to find an answer. Honestly, I would like to just continue forward. What I guess, unless we can find an answer for what if we finish the rest of construction or something and we're ready to kind of move in, we still don't have an answer. And then I can't get my occupancy permit or something because of this sidewalk issue. That would be my concern, is the farther I push it down the line, the farther out that causes our completion date, and finding clear answers, you know what I mean? With various agencies can be difficult. I'm sure you guys are aware, but how about this? Well, I actually don't know. We're talking about a lot of stuff. What's your feel, Jenah?
I do agree in many respects, finding a solution for you to control is probably an easier path forward. I think I'm hearing the committee say, perhaps bring something back so they can give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. It's not, because of the holidays, our next meeting is the 18th, 19th,
It's the 18th
18th.
January.
I could commit to pestering Mr. Tugby, myself, to see if there's a solution with ACHD, adding bulb outs. I don't know that that's something that we could control. They have a lot of their own policies that they would need to navigate, et cetera, and may not be able to give a timely response on this particular issue, especially since it's in a 35% and also on hold pattern.
Yep. I think that'd be my concern too. I wonder with bulb outs on 32nd Street too, right adjacent to Chinden, if they're going to have issues with, bulb outs of somebody turning in and there's a bulb out right in the street, you know what I mean? If it would slow or impede traffic somehow, I don't know. That would be probably a question for them, and how many bulb outs they're looking for. Yeah, my heart tells me, I'd rather find a solution now than waiting and not having any clarity, because we, again, have been kind of trying to hash this out for the past month and a half to just really find a solution that works for our contractors to move forward. So figuring out something that's the most compatible with bulb outs kind of makes sense to me. I think putting, again, a landscape buffer in between that doesn't make any sense, because it would just break up the whole potential future streetscape design. And again, the functionality for me of having landscaping out there when people are going to park on the street and step in it and have it not be clean. And I think it may end up shooting us in the foot in the long term, honestly. And that's just knowing, how maintenance will happen for something that's off of our property in the long term, et cetera. So that's my 2 cents. If we were going to come up with a solution for you guys, I would really love to nail down before I have my contractors continue to work on this and spend hours, exactly kind of what you would like to see, how many benches we're talking about. If we can really make this 3-foot painted buffer work, and we put some trash cans in there, on top of a really cool, interesting design on the sidewalk to make it its own thing. I think that, from my perspective, would help break up this future streetscape design. If they're doing bulb outs further down and they don't want us on our property, then we kind of have an opportunity to do something a little bit more interesting.
I think, Brett, is that your screen share?
Yeah, that's my screen. And that, I guess, my thought is that layout right there with the blue being, it would be acceptable for that blue area to be landscape material, because that's what we basically approved, a 3-foot landscape strip along there in the initial design, because that was what was presented to us. There wasn't a dimension on it, but it was drawn as a 3-foot strip all the way down there. So, and I think, I guess in my opinion, and my feeling on it is that if that was a distinguishable element that was different than the sidewalk, that it indicates and gives people the perception that that's not the walking zone, similar to what would you get from a swath of grass, that you can still walk on top of it, but it distinguishes it differently. It doesn't, so I would be acceptable to a solution like this at this particular location. That's where I am.
I totally agree. I find that acceptable too. I think we could find a solution along those lines that works with that design. We are going to have to add, a lot more concrete, tree wells, landscaping, irrigation, everything in there to make that work. But I think we can do something that's kind of interesting. I would love to hear in between the two tree wells, if you guys are talking about benches, which is great. I love the idea, like Derek said, of having an area where people can catch an Uber and sit out there and wait for the car to pull up. That's functional. I mean, that works with our site and makes our site more functional and useful. That's great. How many benches would you guys like to see there? Does 2 work? I doubt more than 2 would ever get used, but
I guess I'm not too concerned about the benches, 1 or 2, or I just think something there because you have the additional space, and this is hardscape area versus if that was landscape, it wouldn't be utilized for anything, but yet that's the width of landscape that we would typically see in a detached sidewalk. You get that 5 foot of landscape or 6 foot of landscaping, so you could get the trees in there. So if it's hardscape now, how to utilize it, I think that would be something that I'd be okay with you guys coming back and saying, this is given the amount of space that's there, this is what we'd like to do. We'd like a little space for some artwork. We'd like a spot for a bench, whatever. I think I would rather have that in your court to provide something that you think is conducive and reflects kind of the development here and the use here.
Yeah, I agree. I think you mentioned Ben Semple, and he's been on the calls before. I think he can propose something. That's what he does. He's a professional. So I think make that area look like it's a furniture zone in essence. We all have walked through downtowns before with them, so take some cues from those. And then I'm still concerned about the thin blue strips looking like we painted the sidewalk, and then we have a crack in the sidewalk, 3 feet crack, 2 feet of the new added sidewalk. So I'm concerned on how that'll look, and I'm in agreement on the middle spot. I think that can be accommodated and kind of patched in, but the rest of it's going to look like a patch job, and I'm not comfortable with it. But
can we figure out a
I'm
way,
not either.
Derek, to not make it patchy? If we can figure out if I can have the concrete contractors make the cuts in appropriate spots so it doesn't look like it was added on after the fact. Does that make sense?
well, there's already a cut at 5.
Yeah, I'd have to talk to him and see if that's even possible. But, possibly.
Yeah, I guess in a ideal world situation, that would be a different material as a hardscape. I guess in my mind, I would see it as it's pavers or it's stamped concrete that, is very intentional and stained. And I think that that's still the desire. When I look at this, it's not, there's a painted swath there, but it's got different texture and it's got different treatment or different material.
Right. That's what I'm looking for. And then also not old sidewalk versus new sidewalk where we're scabbing on 2 feet. Like, how do you make that all look like one sidewalk as well?
Okay. Just as we're, throwing out ideas again, I'm not a construction specialist, but what if there was an elevation difference in this blue area we're talking about? So if we got a veneer or something of some sort that was like bricks or something, you know what I mean? So it raised it just a little bit, and then you get that different texture.
Well, I suppose because then you can pour a new skin on top of the existing strip that you're going to then add to the new strip. Do you know what I'm saying?
And raise the whole elevation of everything. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
So it's all flush.
Yeah. So you have new you have the blue with your new texture in it. And then you're covering up the old, the rest of the old, and then you're pouring the new. So now new has a completely new top. Sidewalk has a completely new top.
Okay.
And we
If
don't
you
That's
do
see,
something I'm gonna have
that,
to
be
talk about with my
careful at
contractor.
your, yeah, be careful around your driveway that you still maintain ADA standards if you're
Yeah.
gonna do something
Yep.
like that.
Yep, I know that was an issue that came up earlier from our landscape and engineer. We're worried about getting that too close to the driveway, et cetera. So
and then your skin,
well, I
and
think-
then making your skin not deteriorate because you've made it too thin. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yep. Yep, that's where I'm gonna have to go back to contractors and stuff and really kind of put our heads together to see if we can come up with some ideas
Yeah.
that make sense, that are functional, that live. You know, I guess that would be my only concern, is if we're trying to patch something on top of it, is it just gonna peel off or something? So so then are we gonna come up with a concept here, resubmit, and then we won't have an answer for that until January 18th? You were saying?
Gosh,
Are
I
you
mean,
guys comfortable letting Jenah and Hanna kind of, bouncing ideas back off of them before we go back to you guys?
I think they've heard and can interpret what we're looking for, so they can say, yeah, I don't think that they're gonna like this, or yeah, I think this meets everything that they were concerned about. I think they can digest enough of what we said to kind of give you a gut reaction back. But I don't know if the other committee members are comfortable with that being an approval.
I'm agreeable to them going back with the direction that we've given them and putting something together that staff can review and approve, unless they don't feel that it represents what we've talked about here, in the effort to allow these guys to keep moving forward as we're getting into colder weather and going to have issues with actually getting concrete work done effectively.
Yep, thank you for recognizing that.
All right. Well, I think that sounds like we're moving in a direction.
Perfect, yep, and we
All
can
right.
get staff approval for what we're gonna go back and propose to you guys. Okay?
All right.
Perfect.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Jed.
Yep, thanks, guys.
The next item on the agenda is design review fiscal year 21-16. Mr. Likes.
Jenna, before Jeff gets up there, can we take a 5-minute recess?
We certainly can. We're also going to get interrupted at 6 o'clock. There's a city council meeting.
Well, let's keep going.
Are you sure?
6 o'clock hard stop. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, the 6 o'clock is going to end up being a hard stop. Just
Okay.
because of-
All right, let's see if we can't power through.
Hey, Hannah.
Yeah.
Do you know which ones of these USBs I can take out?
Both of them.
Both? Jeff Likes 1119 East State Street, Eagle, Idaho 83616. And you guys, I'm going to bring this up so we can move this along. As you know from your packet, we're here to talk about the Take 5 oil change there. There we go. Yep. Uh-oh. Are you able to see that screen?
We are, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. As you know, we're here to talk about the Take 5 oil change there on Glenwood and Riverside Drive. We were in a few months ago for a pre-app to kind of discuss the project, and we got the staff report. A few things have stuck out kind of from our pre-app, and I want to kind of address those before we get into everything. I know, real quick, just to clarify on the pre-app or on the staff report, it mentioned pedestrian connection, and I did inadvertently leave that off. So I did send a new site plan back in, and you see it here. And I think it's either been emailed to you or emailed to staff at least. So we added connection here, which connected the proposed sidewalk over to Glenwood to the existing sidewalk, which then gets you back out to the public right of way, which actually sits right here behind all the writing. So that's been added back in there. I know that was actually one of our talking points that we had during our pre-app. Another pre-app talking point we had was to the elevation that we had presented during pre-app was a Take 5 prototype. So it's much different than what we have here. We talked about in our pre-app doing a tower element, which we have done here on the south, which actually faces Riverside. Feature there. And so there was a comment that talked about the parapets need to tie back into the roof. And with this tower element, they wrap around, tie back into the roof for there. We did have another talking point on the south elevation to kind of help tie this in with here on the south pedestrian activity. We've added windows, as we've seen here, windows on the south side. We are proposing those to be spandrel because there is oil tanks that sit right there. But at least the windows will help have a little bit of pedestrian connectivity along with some upper windows here to provide lighting. We did talk about making the garage doors have a presence. We've changed out all the garage doors on the east and the west to be full glass garage doors. And again, your other one talked about architectural presence on the corner. We have completely mirrored the plan and created an elevation on the south that has a tower element that gives a little more corner presence to to Glenwood and to Riverside here. Our tower element sits here. There was talk, so all of our existing, this is going on an existing pad in a shopping center. All of the drive aisles, all the parking along Glenwood, all the parking here on the north side is all existing. And all of anything around here, all the drive aisle here, this landscape's existing. We're trying to maintain all that. We're just removing a little bit of parking here to allow for our entrance there. Kind of give you a little help. We've got some stucco. We have some stucco. We have a base of stone. Again, we have quite a bit of glass in this facility, which helps with the transparency of what's going on inside. The colors are tans and the reds. Those are a Take 5 prototype color, we'll say. In your packet, there's more renderings in here for that. And we feel this is a great use for this shopping center. On here, existing parking, everything's kind of existing here, minus we're just filling a pad. With an oil change place, they do not do, part of the staff report talked about if they do any repairs or anything like that, they strictly do oil changes. There's nothing else they do. There's no repairs, no big truck oil changes. It's just passenger vehicles. And I mean, you know, there's the F-150 or the F-250, but there's not commercial trucks that they're doing oil changes on. So again, there's no repairs, no major things like that. That was kind of a question in there. So if you have any questions, we will stand for questions.
I have one question. Do you have a rendering from the I'm not gonna have my north side. Okay, so you're walking down the pedestrian path and you get to the side of the building. So, oh, hold on, go back.
You're
Go
talking
back.
the pedestrian path of what side? Sorry.
Well, the pedestrian path that you put in, stop right there. Goes right where your, well, right where my cursor is. Yeah, right there. That's the pedestrian path that would go extend all
On
the
the
way
north
to
side.
Glenwood. Right. So can you go to the right a little bit? I want to see that elevation on that side.
Maybe that one?
No,
There's your-
the
there's your
side.
west facing.
The north side. The one with the one-man door.
Yes.
Yeah, it'll be right here. This is your best elevation for that. The man door, you can get here on this. If I can go back, here we go. It's more of this elevation here where the parking is on the north side. It's this north elevation, which goes into, whoops, can't zoom in. It goes into this area here. Again, and this facility, you might be asking whether pedestrians get out of their cars. They don't get out of their car. They drive in. It's literally 5 minutes and they're out. So they're wow. That's okay. They're made to stay in their car. They're not encouraged to get out for that. But to answer your question, this is the side. Kind of there is where you'll be seeing.
I have a quick question on the trees that are to be relocated. When I read the keynote, it seems to kind of point just back to that it's being relocated. Do we know where those trees are being relocated?
These ones here or here. There are a couple.
I read the ones up front to remain. There's a couple over
These
by
are
the
all
trash
to be
enclosure.
remaining. Anything around here, we'll just relocate to where we need them to.
Okay.
Right now, if you look at the pictures on there, there isn't a lot of trees on the current site.
Okay.
There might be one existing planter that we can relocate to one of our new planters.
The only reason I ask is there's a keynote number 8 and 9. I was reading those to be relocated by the trash enclosure, and I just wanted to make sure that you stayed within the code requirements next to parking spaces.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we can relocate them to make them useful again. Yeah.
Thank you. Seeing no additional questions, should I turn it over to staff for a staff report if staff has any pertinent items?
Sure.
Good evening. This is Hanna Veal, the Associate Planner. This is Design Review Application DSR FY 2021-16. And for the sake of time, I'll try and keep my report short. It's recommended that the committee discuss the pedestrian connectivity throughout the site from Glenwood as well as Riverside Drive in association with those surrounding uses in the commercial shopping mall. Also, it's recommended that the committee discuss the items such as the facade, the textures, the glazing, etc. that are proposed on this building. There was a new site plan submitted on December 15th, 2021, showing the new pedestrian connection from the existing parking lot sidewalk. And with that addition or this additional site submittal, it essentially eliminates all of staff's comments regarding pedestrian connection of 8 to 4E7 compliance, unless the committee does not feel that this pedestrian connection meets code standards. The building currently appears to address the corner of Riverside Street and Glenwood, as it was discussed in the pre-application meeting. The use is primarily car focused, as Jeff has explained, with there to be no primary pedestrian entrance except for what staff is understanding that side door, which appears to have a blank facade, not indicating a primary entrance. If the committee agrees with the staff's analysis, the decision document will need an additional condition made by the committee because the staff has not drafted a decision or condition regarding this facade and having that employee entrance have a larger prominence. Those I stand for questions.
Any questions? Seeing none, is there anyone in the audience wishing to testify on this matter? And I can see that there's no one online either. I can turn it back over to Jeff. Mr. Likes.
Yeah, I mean, I think we answered staff's questions about the connectivity. It sounds like there might be a little bit of maybe question on this north side here. You know, as far as material goes or whatever, it does match what we're proposing on the other three sides. It is against, I mean, per se, it is against another building. You can't really tell, but there's another building that sits right here, another drive-through. So we're really not trying to draw attention to that side. We draw attention to the other three sides, which are the sides that are dressed up more with the glass and the overhead doors.
Thank you.
Jeff, on that east elevation, what is that use that's on the right-hand side there where there's that one window? Yeah, what is that? Yeah, what's going on there?
I think it's their AC unit for their office.
Oh, how unfortunate. What is, so that's an office that's inside that space there?
Let me see if I can zoom in for you, Brett, here to just to. So it's just a small office is all this is in that corner. So if that AC unit is
gosh, I mean, isn't it something that can be?
I was gonna say we could certainly move something to the roof because we can screen it up there if we need to.
I think that's an important elevation there as it fronts the main street. And the more that can happen there, I think for me, there's almost like not enough detail elements. You know, I think that, I don't know, maybe canopies over the door, the roll-up doors, or I mean, some other level of detail on that front facade is, I guess, is warranted in my opinion to really give it that, I don't know, presence and frontage on the street.
Could we, I'm just throwing an idea out here, could we propose that the tower element would be here, here, and then here be all stone? That would help delineate this tower, give it a nice presence, and then these could remain a stone base here with stucco above it.
I think something like that, just getting some more, I guess, more interest, if you will, in that front facade or those street facing facades to, I don't know, create a little bit more, should we say, detail. When I look at the rendered images, there's just with that little wainscot of stone down at the bottom, and then everything else is the same colored stucco.
I would tell you, having the stone up here, we did look at it. Having the stone on this actually really makes it look nice. It delineates everything over here. And we can certainly show that maybe to staff or have them email you guys or whatever it may be, you know, to show it to you.
I still think that I don't know, I'm curious to what the other committee members think, but I just, that street facing this facade that's facing Glenwood there, it's just awful flat.
Yeah, I agree.
I would
It's-
still like to see something, some kind of a canopy element or some kind of relief over those doors to really add a level of detail there, because we don't have this main pedestrian entrance element on either street frontage.
And I'm concerned
Might be
about
able-
the other elevation, so I'm wondering if having, I hate awnings just for the sake of having awnings, but an awning over that office window as well as the employee entrance door. In addition to what you're talking about.
I was just gonna suggest maybe some awnings over those overhead doors. That helps. It helps break up this facade. It'll help break up actually all the facades here. We could do awnings over here.
Just
one
needs
over
some,
the-
it just needs some
entrance door.
scale giving elements on those.
I'm sorry, what,
and-
Brett?
I said it needs some scale giving elements on those facades. So I think awnings, incorporating some awnings. And I would agree on that one facade with the single man door there. It needs a little something to give it a little human scale and bring the scale of that down. I mean, it's a very tall wall and it's flat with, so I think if you could add some elements, some awnings. I would like to see something over those garage doors that face Glenwood though, just because of that. Again, it's just a tall, flat facade, fairly flat.
We can certainly add something for you.
And to be clear, the Riverside Drive, that is 3 large windows on that side. Is that correct? I'm
That is
seeing-
correct. So that
Okay.
is the south elevation, which is right
Yep.
here.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
And I agree with the other committee members on adding something over those garage doors on the street front sides. And maybe that's the answer, maybe something else is the answer, but it needs something. It's those doors are just too overwhelming to not be not have other things going on to make them more, well, make them less to scale.
We can do that.
Right. Are there other items that you see that need to be discussed on this particular application?
I think I'm okay with the pedestrian connection that has been added and proposed in there, and I don't think it's appropriate for a connection from Riverside there, cutting across the multiple access lanes that feed into this facility. I would prefer to drive all the pedestrian traffic on that other connection.
I agree. I mean, if there's going to be a pedestrian accessing it, it's going to be someone who works there, who's someone's going to the office. Or they're going to get the car that's parked there, but I'm less concerned about them. That is the appropriate place, I think, for the pedestrian connectivity.
Okay, I don't have any more comments.
All right. Is there a motion then?
Are
Are
we
you- all right.
making a motion, or do we want to see elevations, or do we?
Okay. Are you wanting to see it have this brought back?
I would like to see it
I
brought
would.
back. I'm not convinced about the awnings over the garage doors. I am on the other things, but so I would like to see it.
Okay. We'll work with you on timing there, and what we'll do right now is continue this to a date certain of Tuesday, January the 18th at 3 p.m. And I do have to apologize
Hannah?
to the next item on
Remember
the
when our
agenda.
CU is?
When
the
But
conditional
we are
uses?
going to have to conclude this meeting tonight. My most sincere apologies. I know you just sat through the entire meeting. Again, we'll continue your application to a date certain of Tuesday, January the 18th at 3 p.m. I know that you've been working with Hanna on some of the concerns, and you can see your staff report. Thank you. And with that, want to thank the committee very much for hanging out there and not taking a break as well. Thank you very much for your time, and we can conclude this meeting at 5:59 and see you next year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Happy
Bye.
holidays, everyone.
You as
too.
well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
And then maybe we just get back. Yep, please do.
Okay, and I'm gonna cancel the recording. I think so. Let me.